Okay, students, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your piece of paper and you're going to get it mounted onto your, the back of the, oh, I already have a piece mounted onto this, so this is what you're doing. Mounting it onto the back of the clipboard. We tape it down. It is important that you tape as evenly across here as possible. The best way to do this so that it doesn't rip your paper after is to take the tape, kind of measure, eyeball it out for how big it needs to be, and then take this and stick it to your clothes so it has some of the hair from your clothing on there, and that helps it to not stick quite as much. Then when you attach it, push firmly. So I'm leaving about, I don't know, what is that, about a ½ inch border there. So that will leave a nice white border when you, here's one I did before. So it'll leave a nice white border around. Okay, so go ahead and take care of that. Okay, so now that you got your piece of tape down, you're going to be taking your Sharpie marker. Now, one thing I want to say about Sharpies, it doesn't always matter, but it does kind of matter on this project, that you have a marker with a sharp tip. So if you can see on that one, the tip is pretty nicely pointed. But see how on this one it's an older one and it's a little bit more rounded and blunt? The reason why this matters, it doesn't normally matter with a Sharpie, but it does matter with this one because you're getting into the details of the outline, and it is easier to do at the fine point. Okay, so having said that, you have a choice of creating some shapes on the inside if you want to. Like you can add a shape, you know, there. Let's see. I'm also going to add a couple. Ooh, whoops, that probably was not the best shape to add. I can't really see what I'm doing. It's bumpy. Oh, that one wasn't so good. Whoops. Okay, well, I'll fix that in my drawing. Let's see here. Let me find a different one. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. You don't have to do this, but sometimes it's kind of interesting. You could grab different objects and create different shapes. Let's see here if I used one of my watercolor paint things. I moved it. Yeah, that one's not my favorite either. Okay, well anyway, we'll play with this. So find some different shapes if you want to. Otherwise, you don't have to worry about that. You just do the lines. But either way, so say you have your shapes, and now it's time to do your lines, or you're just doing your lines. Lines have to connect from side to side, whether they go across, whether they're going up from here to there, or down from here to here, but they have to run off the page. Only the interior shapes that you've created that are staying kind of in the center of the page can be on the page. The rest have to run off the page. So no unfinished lines that kind of start here. So you can even draw on your tape, and you're just going to kind of do like these lines. And there's no right or wrong, it's just kind of like that. You can make it as chaotic as you want or as neat as you want. There's literally no right or wrong with this. Okay, that looks absolutely chaotic to me, so we'll see how it goes. I'm not doing this with any kind of design in mind. You can actually create these with much more intricate designs and things like that, but I'm not doing that. Now you have your mess of a layout, and now you're going to come in. With neurographic art, what your focus is you're rounding out all of these edges. So the idea is, here's one that has a butterfly image that I've done. So the idea is you're creating these connections. It's supposed to be like neurons of the brain, okay? Like I said, we're not going to get into all that stuff. We're just going to create a cool piece of art. So by creating these connections, you're rounding out all your edges. So on this one, I was gearing this towards younger kids, and so I made it more simplistic. But as you do it, like, so for this one, I would just fill that in. I wouldn't even try and clean that up. But for any other hard angle where the lines intersect, you're going to come in and you're going to smooth that out and round that line out. And this is why having a sharp Sharpie matters. If you have a dull Sharpie, it makes your life much harder. Like that one I'm just going to fill in. So this, I'm not going to try and detail out those. I'm just going to kind of round that whole thing. And then here, I'm going to round that. I'll go in and thicken up all my lines later. I'm going to kind of round that whole thing out, and then I'm going to round that whole thing out. And then when you go in, then you finish your line out and kind of smooth things out. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to do all of my lines. Okay, so thank goodness for time lapse, because that actually took a really long time. So don't be surprised if it takes a long time. And also make sure to double check and make sure that you don't have any other angles. I don't think I have any others, but if I do, I'll see it, and hopefully I catch it before I start the painting, because once I start painting and it's wet, I can't fix my angles. I could always go back after the fact and do it, but it is easier if you can catch it beforehand. So maybe have a friend check over and see if they see any hard angles. Okay, so this is the point where we start to watercolor. And this is probably not going to be on day one. I do not want you doing too simple of designs. I want you to make sure you have enough line interest and variation. And notice how in certain areas I filled in the whole area because that just seemed simpler, and it kind of adds some visual interest. And in other areas, like this one where I didn't need to, I thickened the line even though there was no need to, because I liked the way that it looked more. So you have the ability to change the thickness and the thinness of the line. And I tend to make my lines thicker as I'm curling them out. I find it easier, honestly, to make them thicker than to try and keep them super thin, and I like the way it looks. So, okay, so now you're going to be ready to paint. So when it's time, you're going to pick your, I would recommend picking your color palette first, because once you have your paint going, if you decide you don't like a certain color, it's, you know, not something you're going to be able to fix. So I would pick a color palette and decide, like, okay, this one was for young kids, like I said, but I did a color palette for their practicing color wheel stuff and warm, cool colors. So I have my bright reds, oranges, and yellows and pinks on the butterfly, and that's my warm palette. And then I have the blues, greens, and purples underneath as my background for the cool palette. But you could easily do, you don't have to do colors that juxtapose. You could do colors that are analogous with one another. Remember what analogous means? It is in your notes section if you don't remember. You could do colors that are complementary. Remember what complementary means? You could do colors that, you know, where you're kind of like changing across the whole grid, or you could do colors where you're like really playing against each other in all of the spaces. But the idea is that when you start painting, you're painting each individual space and you're not crossing the lines. So it's really important that when you paint, you're not overusing your water. You're on a slope with this clipboard, so be careful. But don't overuse the water because you don't want these areas to bleed together at all. So you want them just to pick up the water or just to pick up the color in this area. For beginning watercolor students, I will come around and help you, but just remember for returning watercolor students that you don't want to overdo your pigment. You are always using more water and less pigment in your mix. So if you need a refresher on watercolor, just let me know and I will help to remind you of how to work watercolor so that it is a beautiful medium that blends well and creates a nice translucent mixed watery look. That's the whole point of watercolor. Watercolor is not to be used like acrylic or gouache or tempera paint. It is very different, so make sure that you use it well. So I'm going to go ahead and watercolor my piece.